You're listening to the Dead Presidents Podcast.
And this is the Top 5 Drunkest Presidents.
5, we're about to take a dive. 4, in the presidential lore. 3, who will talk like me? 2, we're about to tell you. 1, the show's now begun.
Welcome to the Dead Presidents Podcast. I am James J. Hamilton.
I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And you're in for a booze-soaked episode this week as we dive into...
The Top 5 Drunkest Presidents.
Number 5.
James Buchanan. Renowned for handling large quantities of wine or whiskey without appearing drunk. Preferred top-shelf liquor. Actually, he would have J.B. Scotch sent to the White House in crates of scotch.
Yeah.
And the initials JB would be on there. And he would tell everybody, that's just something of mine. I'm
It's
having
his own
shipped."
personal brand.
Yeah, that was his own personal property or whatever. He didn't let out that it was booze, but yeah, he would import entire crates of scotch to the White House.
Yeah, he was known for his ability to hold his liquor and not get all fallen down about it.
Yeah, he there's one story where he fell down the stairs in the White House in front of a couple of congressmen, but it was blamed on his shoes. But when he was at college at 16, he drank 16 toasts at a July 4th celebration. Now that's America right there. Later, of course, he was suspended for disorderly conduct. Yeah. But was it all about the drinking? I mean, we might delve into that in a later episode.
He did it up in college. I think he said that in order to be one of the guys and appear popular, that he went along with all manner of debauchery and inanity as were popular in colleges at the time.
Yeah. Well, he definitely wanted to impress the guys.
True.
As an ambassador to Russia, he complained that the Russian royalty didn't drink much, but he admired the Russian peasant for drinking enough vodka to kill the devil.
That's Russia for you. Impressive to a drinker like James Buchanan.
It's intense. As the Secretary of State, he threw a little bash with about 300 bottles of wine and 150 bottles champagne in addition to liquor. As I've mentioned before, casks of whiskey, boxes, crates with the J&B brand on there, and he would tell servants at the White House it was just, it's just something I'm having shipped from home.
He'd pick up cases of whiskey on his way home from church. Sunday morning was for God. The rest of the day was for the demon alcohol.
For the demon alcohol, yeah. Just, he was opposed to early prohibition efforts, he had, I mean, eventually he had to quit drinking. Flare-ups of the gout, probably caused by his own habits.
Yep.
Too bad. But, we'll delve into some of the reasons behind his heavy drinking in a later episode.
Episode number 15, when we get to James Buchanan. Most of the top 5 drunkest presidents, their drinking stories don't necessarily have happy endings.
No, they truly don't. And that brings us to Top 5 Drunkest President.
Number 4.
George W. Bush.
George W. Bush, the most modern of our drunk presidents.
That's the only modern.
He, he got started at a young age. As an adolescent, he poured vodka into the fishbowl and killed his sister's goldfish.
Brutal.
That was his inauguration into the life. He went to Yale, joined a fraternity. In an infamous incident at the 1967 Yale-Princeton football game at Princeton, a drunken George W. Bush scaled the goalpost,
squirreled right on up there.
He tried to tear it down. He was arrested. He was released only upon promising never to return to Princeton.
Well, he didn't tear it down. He used to be a cheerleader.
Yeah, well, that's what male cheerleadering was in the day.
No, that's
Get
fun.
trashed
Get-
and tear down the
fucked
opponent's
up and
goalpost.
Be raucous.
Several years later, he was driving home drunk, crashed into his dad's trash can. When his dad came out mad, he challenged him to a fight. Jeb had to step in and break it up.
Wow. I would have liked to have seen that.
Yep. A historic...
What the hell are you
showdown.
doing, W?
He was not happy with his son. W, he went on, he got a DUI a few years after that in Maine. He was partying all night with an Australian tennis player, taught him how to pick up a beer glass with his teeth and chug it with no hands.
Wow.
He tried to keep up drinking with an Aussie and ended up arrested. Family friend who was in the car with him at the time told the cop, "Don't you know who his father is?" That didn't work. He still got popped for the DUI, but the story didn't come out until just days before the 2000 election.
Oh, how convenient.
Karl Rove said that story breaking cost Bush like several states that may be responsible for the deadlock in the 2000 election.
Okay.
But it ended up that W won with the help of his running mate Dick Cheney, who had 2 DUIs of his own. That ticket overcame the buzz-killing Gore Lieberman ticket and its puny 0 DUIs. That election was DUIs 3 versus 0.
Yeah.
You see who America went with.
That's it. They went for the DUI hat trick.
Yeah, the ticket they want to have a beer with. It's long been a part of George W. Bush's campaign style. When he was running for Congress in 1978, he threw a Bush Bash campaign event where he offered free beer to attendees.
Wow.
His opponent lambasted him for it. He ended up losing that election, but that was the last election he'd ever lose.
Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
Like, really?
I mean, that was big way back in the day. Like George
course it was.
Washington, that was the campaign style back in the day.
Oh, stump speeches and hard cider and all that
campaign
fun stuff.
event was free alcohol for all who
And that's
attended.
it. Like, yeah, people loved it.
You're gonna
It was-
sit
it
there and
was
listen
like-
to speeches for 3 hours.
Yeah, it was like
You're gonna get tuned
professional
up.
wrestling.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not how things are anymore.
Yeah, too bad.
But Bush, yeah, he had a problem. He realized, he later admitted that by his mid-30s he was drinking routinely with occasional benders. He ended up getting trashed on his 40th birthday, running up a, quote, colossal bar tab. The next day, he woke up with a severe headache and hangover and resolved to quit drinking.
I've been there so many times.
Well, on Bush's 40th birthday, he really finally reached the end of his drinking road.
What?
He found religion, and it was God that saved him from the demon alcohol.
If you were really gonna like put it down to like a presidential candidate that you'd rather have a beer with, and you look at Bush and Gore, if you have a beer with Bush, he's probably gonna like tell you some like fucked up stories about how he was on coke
Yeah.
and like did something crazy. Al Gore would probably just show you a PowerPoint about global climate change,
Yeah.
which would be informative but not as entertaining.
Yeah, I think Hunter S. Thompson told a story that he encountered a young Bush at a Super Bowl party in the 1970s where Bush showed up at a party trying to score cocaine. I think Bush ended up passed out in the bathtub, according to Hunter S. Thompson,
Wow.
who referred to Bush as a gilded coke dilettante.
That is classic Thompson.
And classic George W. Bush, but he reformed his ways and became very presidential by the end.
Yeah. Well, I guess that brings us to Drunkest President number 3.
Andrew Johnson.
So most biographers considered Johnson a moderate drinker for his era. But his political enemies really clinged on to that and called him the drunken tailor. He was a tailor. He had no, he made clothes.
Yep.
That's what he did.
Blue collar guy.
Yeah, pretty much. And he was earned that moniker from one infamous incident, and this was Lincoln's second inaugural. Johnson became the vice president because he was the only Democratic senator to stay loyal to the Union. And he had a cold, and the doctor prescribed whiskey?
Yeah, that was the prescription back in the day.
Yeah, so, like, they were like, oh, we'll just, like, have some whiskey. Well, he overdid it, and, he got, like, really legitimately fucked up. Like, he was absolutely swashbuckled, and he got up there to make his speech.
In the Senate, upon his swearing in as vice president.
And it was just a truly cringeworthy experience where he called out virtually every congressman by name, whether or not he could remember their name. And like, it's one of those things where it's like, oh, such and such from Maine and such from New Hampshire, and what's his name from Ohio? Like, that kind of thing. And he's just going on and on and on, and then he goes into this, it's really well told in the documentary The American President, where they have, the quotes of the speech read, and it's like, I'm a-coming for to tell you here today. I'm a-coming for to tell you here today that I am a plebeian. I glory in it. And, like, all this and that, and it just goes on, and,
He was supposed
everybody's just embarrassed as shit. Yeah. Like, Lincoln's sitting there like, fuck. You know?
Yeah, he's supposed to speak for 5 minutes. He rambles on incoherently for about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Before they, like, drag him off the stage.
Yeah. It was described as, quote, a rambling and strange harangue that was listened to with pain and mortification by all his friends. Another quote, the man is certainly deranged, either drunk or crazy. And future President Rutherford Hayes was in attendance, and he wrote to his wife, Lucy, that, quote, it was lucky you did not come to the inauguration. The bad weather and Andy Johnson's disgraceful drunkenness spoiled it. So that wow. You know, you think of Lincoln's second inaugural, like that speech that he gave.
Yep. Classic speech.
That classic speech. And it was the prelude to that.
Everyone's like rolling their eyes at this dumbass becoming vice president. Like, how long was it? A month or two before he became president?
Well, I think that spawned the quote. I can't remember where it came from, but we'll delve into that in episode 17 on Andy Johnson. And there was a quote from a newspaper that said, to think that this impish clown, or to think that one frail life stands between this impish clown and the presidency is horrifying a prospect.
Yep.
You know, that kind of thing.
And that prospect became a reality within a couple months or so.
Well, that's it. Like, very, very quickly. You're talking March 4th to April...
something, yeah.
Good Friday. I can't remember the date. I'm ashamed.
President Andy Johnson he was impeached. He was placed on trial.
Right.
He famously received news of his acquittal in the impeachment trial and toasted a whiskey celebration with his friends to celebrate his acquittal.
Why not? Hey, I'd probably do the same thing. And of course, after the presidency, he got elected to the Senate. That was a historical first.
Yep.
And he gave a speech from a Nashville balcony where he was allegedly swaying back and forth, almost inarticulate with drink. His 2 sons were drunkards. One died in a horse accident, probably while under the influence, and they call that HUI.
HUI.
Horsing under the influence.
It was a big problem at the time.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, HUIs were
His
was bad. You had to watch.
Johnson's other son killed himself after becoming mired in a prostitution scandal.
Probably drinking.
Yep, the demon alcohol, a curse on the Johnson name
That's it.
and on the Johnson political reputation.
Unfortunate. And that brings us to Drunkest President,
Number 2.
Ulysses S. Grant.
Ulysses Grant, infamous for his drinking. He went to West Point. He joined the Army. He acquired his drinking habit during the Mexican-American War, as was common among soldiers at the time. But the thing about, we talked about Buchanan earlier being able to hold his liquor. The thing about Grant is that he couldn't hold his liquor.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that with another one here.
Been said of Grant, it's not so much like how often he drank or how much he drank, but just the effect it would have on him.
Right.
He would have one drink and become immediately flushed and end up embarrassing himself. After the Mexican-American War, he was assigned to a post up in the lonely Pacific Northwest. He got reprimanded for being drunk on duty, and his commanding officer made him write out his resignation with no date on it, meaning if you are drunk again, we're filling in a date on this.
Fill in the date.
And then on another occasion, he was drunk, and rather than face court-martial charges, which he probably would have been, reprimanded but allowed to stay in the Army, he was terrified of having his wife find out that he was in trouble for this, so he resigned from the Army, and he didn't, he went on to have a lot of failed business ventures and was really a total failure until the Civil War broke out and the need for trained military men.
Yeah, that's
came in.
It's really something. He was described to President Lincoln by a critic as a jackass in the original package. He is a poor, drunken imbecile. He is most of the time more than half drunk, and much of the time idiotically drunk.
Yep.
I wonder if that was McClellan that said that.
No, I don't think it was McClellan.
No?
It was somebody else. During the Civil War, Grant started being, he was like a nobody, but he started being pretty successful. He was one of the only generals who would be aggressive and take the fight to the enemy, and he was winning. A lot of the other officers were jealous, and they'd harp on his drinking to try to drag him down.
Bring him down.
But he was the one who was winning. He was the most successful general, and so it was Lincoln who reputedly quipped, "Find out what brand Grant drinks and send some to my other generals."
There we go.
I've read Ron Chernow has the great biography of Grant, and it talks a lot about his drinking, and his enemies would like to accuse him of being drunk in battle and stuff, but it seemed like he would never actually drink on the front lines or on duty when he has stuff going on, but anytime he'd go away from the front lines on furlough or go on a trip, that he'd have a bender.
Yeah, I read that basically the biggest point of his drinking during the entire war was the siege of Vicksburg.
Mm-hmm.
When they were just waiting, shelling.
Yeah, just a lot of waiting around.
Really the only time that he got hammered, fucked.
He'd keep he'd pledge again and again that he's never going to touch a drop of alcohol, but then whenever a time of boredom and loneliness would come, he would succumb to the bottle. Times that he had to be away from his wife and just away from his troops, he'd go on a bender. I think it was in New Orleans after a military parade. He got trashed and fell off his horse, injured his leg.
Wow.
I think there was another occasion where he fell off a wagon. His chief of staff was John Rollins, who later became a cabinet member, I think. He took upon himself the role of kind of like Grant's sponsor, who would he would make sure that he would stay away from alcohol, and he'd defend Grant against accusations that he was drinking on duty. When he became president, Grant was always in the public eye, so he was real careful about his drinking at that time, and also his wife was always around. So he'd kind of kept it within reason while he was president. But
yeah, I don't know, man. Based on photographs, I think if I was Grant, I would be drinking around my wife.
Well,
What a dog.
that's yep.
Oof, oof, oof.
That brings me to the last thing I want to say about Grant's drinking. There's a pretty funny letter. When Grant stopped being president, he went on like a big trip around the world.
Yeah.
And there's a letter he went to India, and there was apparently an alcohol-fueled incident in India. And there's a letter written by the British Viceroy of India about Grant that I'm going to read from now.
Excellent.
On this occasion, our distinguished guest, the double ex-president of the great Western Republic, who got drunk as a fiddle, showed that he could also profligate as a lord. He fumbled Mrs. A, kissed the shrieking Mrs. B, pinched the plump Mrs. C black and blue, and ran at Miss D with the intent to ravish her. Finally, after throwing the female guests into hysterics by generally misbehaving like an elephant, the noble beast was captured by main force and carried by 6 sailors, which relieved India of his distinguished president.
They're making him out like Monty Python's like Terry Jones as Martin Luther.
The Marine officer reports that when deposited in the public saloon cabin where Mrs. Grant was awaiting him, this remarkable man satiated there and then his baffled lust upon the unresisting body of his legitimate spouse and copiously vomited during the operation.
God.
If you have seen Mrs. Grant, you will not think this incredible.
Well, that's true.
So the British
That's true.
Viceroy claims that Grant was vomiting
Yeah.
profusely
during sex.
with his wife.
Yeah, and like I'm gonna tell you straight up, like that we're gonna continue the top 5 as a trend
Yeah.
for the show, and there will probably be an episode on the top 5 best looking first ladies.
Mm-hmm.
And let me just say that Julia Grant will not be on that list.
No.
Definitively. And with that, we finally get down to Drunkest President,
Number 1.
Franklin Pierce. Drinking destroyed Pierce's health. It damaged his public and private image.
He had a lot
But-
to drink about.
He had a lot to drink about. He had all of his kids die. It summoned youth, and then of course Benjamin Pierce, which was like the light of him and Jane's life, was killed in a horrific train wreck in which the top of his head was crushed right in front of them. And that was like on the way to Washington to be sworn in.
On the way to his inauguration, his 11-year-old son is horrifically killed in front of his eyes.
And his other kids had already died, so like they weren't gonna have any more kids. Like the future of their name, that was it. So devastating. He would drink and gamble with his lifelong friend, famous author of, among other things, The Scarlet Letter, Twice Told Tales, Nathaniel Hawthorne.
And Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote a biography of Pierce for his campaign.
That's true.
They
Yeah,
were-
it was an early campaign biography, and Hawthorne was not really keen on doing it.
No.
He really didn't like the idea of trying to write a political biography. He only did it because Pierce was such a good friend.
Yeah.
He was uncomfortable doing it. But it's interesting.
Cool.
I've actually read that. It's interesting. Actually, in 1864, Pierce and Hawthorne went on a trip together, like a little bro weekend.
Yeah.
You know, they would do that occasionally.
Broing it up.
Yeah, just bro it up. And Hawthorne died on that trip. He was supposedly ill and died in his sleep.
That's
but
what Pierce said.
That's what Pierce said, but I think we at the Dead Presidents podcast would like to introduce a little theory that we cooked up.
Yeah.
That might be probably closer to the truth.
Yeah.
So, they were playing a drinking game. And Hawthorne was trying to keep up with Pierce shot for shot. And he paid with his life.
Yeah. That's what you get. You try to keep up with Frank Pierce.
That's it. Like, early on, like, that's what I'd mentioned earlier when we mentioned that Grant could not handle his liquor. Early on, it was said that Pierce could not handle his liquor. Like, he wasn't drinking a hell of a lot. He would just drink some and be, like, totally fucked up. But, like, as he progressed, it, like, he became more and more numb to it.
Yeah, Hawthorne's death was towards the end of Pierce's life, too, when he was really in the home stretch of his drink.
Yeah, beyond the home stretch. You know, it was a sad, dark time. I mean, as a congressman in the 1830s, Pierce's wife Jane stayed home in New Hampshire, so Pierce was able to just drink and party unfettered in D.C., which he did quite a bit of. He ran with a really heavy drinking crowd, and when he left the Senate in 1841, he decided, okay, I'm getting fucked up all the time. I need to stop drinking. And he decided he would sign a temperance pledge. That was probably at the behest of his nagging shrew wife. That only lasted until the Mexican-American War, when Colonel Pierce returned to his old habits.
Yeah, both he and Grant were gotten by the Mexican-American War.
That's
can't
true.
Can't be down and campaigning on Mexico without tipping the bottle back a little bit to drown your sorrows.
That's it. And, when he later became president, a friend wrote to James Buchanan saying that Pierce has had a fine reputation, but I deeply, deeply deplore his habits. He drinks deep. My heart bleeds for him, for he is gallant and a generous spirit. He had, needless to say, an unsuccessful presidency, as the North-South split over slavery became more and more serious, and when he left office, Pierce said, quote, "After the White House, what is there to do but drink?" And that is exactly what he did. He literally drank himself to death and succumbed to cirrhosis of the liver at the age of 65.
So young. You guys notice most of the top 5 drunkest presidents came from the same era.
What's that?
No, we got presidents number 14, 15,
17, 18.
Yep. From the years 1853 to 1877, with the brief 4-year respite of Lincoln's presidency, we believe that constitutes the presidential alcoholism era.
Yeah, the age of presidential drunkenness.
No wonder that the 19th president, Rutherford B. Hayes, and his teetotaling wife,
Lemonade Lucy,
banned alcohol from the White House completely. After the presidential alcoholism era, it was time to dry out.
Time to dry out and sober up.
And that's just what we're going to do until next time, right here at the Dead Presidents Podcast.